These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence by Kristen Godsey. And this is from the introduction titled, You Might Be Suffering from Capitalism. The argument of this book can be summed up succinctly. Unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And if we adopt some ideas from socialism, women will have better lives. If done properly, socialism leads to economic independence, better labor conditions, better work-family balance, and yes, even better sex. Finding a way into a better future requires learning from the mistakes of the past, including a thoughtful assessment of the history of 20th century state socialism in Eastern Europe. That's it. If you like the idea of such outcomes, then come along for an exploration of how we might change things. If you're dubious because you don't understand why capitalism as an economic system is uniquely bad for women, and if you doubt that there could ever be anything good about socialism, this short treatise will provide some illumination. If you don't give a whit about women's lives because you're a gynophobic right-wing internet troll, save your money and go back to your parents' basement right now. This isn't the book for you. Of course, some might argue that unregulated capitalism sucks for almost everyone, but I want to focus on how capitalism disproportionately harms women. Competitive labor markets discriminate against those whose reproductive biology makes them primarily responsible for childbearing. Today, this means humans who get pink hats in the hospital and the letter F next to the name on their birth certificate, as if we've already failed by not coming into the world as a boy. Competitive labor markets also devalue those expected to be the primary caregivers of children. Although societal attitudes have evolved in this regard, our idealization of motherhood means that most of us still believe that baby needs mama, a whole lot more than papa, at least until the child is old enough to play sports. Others will argue that unregulated capitalism is not bad for all women. Yes, for those women lucky enough to sit at the top of the income distribution, the system works pretty well. Although women at the executive level still face gender pay gaps and remain underrepresented in leadership positions, on the whole, things aren't too shabby for the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world. Of course, sexual harassment still hinders progress, even for those at the top, and too many women believe that if you want to run with the big dogs, you may have to suck it up and ignore the groping and unwanted advances. And race plays an important role as well. White women do a lot better in aggregate than do women of color. But when we look at society as a whole, on average, women are comparatively worse off in countries where markets are less encumbered by regulation, taxation, and public enterprises than they are in nations where state revenues support greater levels of redistribution and larger social safety nets. Choose your data source, and you find the same story. Unemployment and poverty plague women with children. Employers discriminate against women without children because they might have them in the future. In the United States in 2013, women over the age of 65 suffered from poverty at much greater rates than men, and dominated those in the category of extreme poverty. Globally, women face higher rates of economic deprivation. Women are often the last to be hired and the first to be fired in cyclical downturns. And when they do find employment, bosses pay them less than men. When states need to slash government spending on education, health care, or old age pensions, mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives must pick up the slack, diverting their energy to care for the young, the sick, and the elderly. Capitalism thrives on women's unpaid labor in the home because women's care work supports lower taxes. Lower taxes mean higher profits for those already at the top of the income ladder, mostly men. But capitalism was not always so savage. Throughout much of the 20th century, state socialism presented an existential challenge to the worst excesses of the free market. The threat posed by Marxist ideologies forced Western governments to expand social safety nets to protect workers from the unpredictable but inevitable booms and busts of the capitalist economy. After the Berlin Wall fell, many celebrated the triumph of the West, consigning socialist ideas to the dustbin of history. But for all its faults, state socialism provided an important foil for capitalism. It was in response to a global discourse of social and economic rights, a discourse that appealed not only to the progressive populations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but also to many men and women in Europe and Western Europe and North America, that politicians agreed to improve working conditions for wage laborers, as well as to create social programs for children, the poor, the elderly, the sick, and the disabled, mitigating exploitation and the growth of income inequality. Although there were important antecedents in the 1980s, once state socialism collapsed, capitalism shook off the constraints of market regulation and income redistribution. Without the looming threat of a rival superpower, the last 30 years of global neoliberalism have witnessed a rapid shriveling of social programs that protect citizens from cyclical instability and financial crises, and reduce the vast inequality of economic outcomes between those at the top and those at the bottom of the income distribution. For much of the 20th century, Western capitalist countries also endeavored to outdo the East European countries in terms of women's rights, fueling progressive social change. For example, the state socialists in the USSR and Eastern Europe were so successful at giving women economic opportunities outside the home that initially, for the 2 decades after the end of World War II, women's wage work was conflated with the evils of communism. The American way of life meant male breadwinners and female homemakers. But slowly, socialist championing of women's emancipation began to chip away at the Leave It to Beaver ideal. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 spurred American leaders to improve the costs
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. Boy, it was raining like crazy here in Portland earlier. I hope things are well where you are. It is the first anniversary, the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis. And there are a bunch of pieces to this story, to this larger issue of race in America, to the policing. In fact, the policing part of it, we'll get into it, a bit today, but I probably am going to do a deeper dive on this tomorrow or the following day. But I think the larger issue is one of how does America deal with race? And to that end, in the second hour of our program, my colleague on Sirius XM, Joe Madison, is going to drop by at the top of the hour. Kymone Freeman is going to drop with Black Lives Matter DC, is going to drop by at the bottom of the second hour. And in our third hour, I want to get into this question of, is the next phase of the pandemic a disease spread by ideology? And also, we've got a special science alert in our third hour for you about Roundup. It's getting grim. And Egberto Willies is gonna join us in about 10 minutes here to discuss this whole issue. And the part that I want to talk to Egberto about, and you, is the piece that I published this morning over at HartmannReport.com, which lays out this premise that I've never heard it framed this way. And maybe I'm nuts, or maybe I'm onto something here. But if you read the Declaration of Independence, it basically makes two statements. The first is that people can govern themselves without kings, queens, or popes. And we've largely accomplished that, right? We have accomplished democracy in the United States of America. It's imperfect. It's been screwed, it's been screwed up in some ways throughout our history. It's not well balanced, the Electoral College, all this kind of stuff. But we have put into place the democracy that we declared in 1776. The second thing that we declared in 1776, though, that, to quote the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. And of course, back in that day, man and mankind were the words that today we would use for people and humankind. That declaration in 1776 that all people are created equal obviously was not being played out in 1776. In fact, the guy who wrote it, Jefferson, was a slaveholder himself. But America has been slowly, over 240 years, in fits and starts certainly, moving toward that vision of a nation where, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, we judge people by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Obviously, we have a long way to go. I don't mean to minimize that at all. In fact, if anything, I'm emphasizing that. But the United States was created, even though our founding documents said all men are created equal, we were founded as a white ethno state, a state based on ethnicity, as an appendage originally, and then a separated appendage to white England, basically. And we put that into law in 1790. This was during the George Washington administration. We put into law it was called the Immigration Act of 1790, that said that white people can immigrate to the United States, but people of any other race can only immigrate into this country to the extent that they represent 2% of their people who are already here. So we had this racist law it put into place in 1790 to basically limit virtually all immigration into the United States to white people. That stood until 1924. And in 1924, as I recall, I should check my own op-ed, it might be 1928, but let's say the 1920s. That stood until the 1920s when we passed an updated Immigration Act, which not only created the Border Patrol, but also this was the Naturalization Act of 1790 was the first one. The one in 1924 was called the Johnson-Reed Act, which created the Border Patrol. And, excuse me, in 1790 we said only white people could immigrate to the United States. In 1924 we said non-whites can immigrate to the United States, but only to the extent that they're 2% of the 1890 census. And that held until 1965. So from 1790 till 1965, immigration to the United States was limited by race. And in 1965, Lyndon Johnson, as part of his civil rights package, pushed through the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which today, most Republicans and the entire white supremacist movement want repealed, which said that immigration into the United States henceforth shall be colorblind. And as a result of that, there have been, since 1965, a large number of people of color who have immigrated to this country. And you combine that with Reagan, basically giving legal citizenship status to between 3 and 4 million Hispanic folks living in this country at that time. Now they're Americans. And as a result of that, the kids entering kindergarten now are majority non-white. Kids being born are majority non-white. In another decade and a half, it could be the voters are majority non-white. And this is making the Republicans nuts. This is making the whole white supremacy movement nuts. Because as Tucker Carlson keeps pointing out on Fox News, the big fear of the whole white supremacist bunch is, oh my God, they're going to replace us. And if they do, they'll do to us what we did to them. We're going to have cops stopping white people and killing us, right? This is their theory, right? So my question, can America rise above racism and embrace a common vision, a higher vision of a common humanity? And, I think it's possible. I'm very hopeful that it's possible. I think if Republicans take the House or Senate in the 2022 election, and if a Republican takes the White House in 2024, all bets are off. Then we slide back into being a white ethno-state, as we were during Trump. For 4 years, temporarily during Trump, we basically froze all non-white immigration into the United States. And in fact, banned it from a whole bunch of non-white countries, you'll recall. But this was done by executive order, and it's been reversed. So can America finally live up to the second of the two promises that we made in the Declaration of Independence? The first being, hey, we can govern ourselves, we don't need no stinking kings. We've done that. The second being, who is this we ourselves, we the people? Oh, it's all of us. We're all created with equal opportunity under the law, equal authority under the law, equal protection under the law, to paraphrase the 14th Amendment. Can we pull that off? And one of the reasons that this is so important is because America very often in these regards leads the world. When we declared democracy in 1776, the world laughed at us. By the time of the Civil War, there was a handful of democracies, fewer than a dozen. And they all held their breath during the Civil War thinking, okay, this is it, this experiment is going to die. Well, it didn't. And so now 123 of the 192 countries in the world call themselves democracies. We not only did that first promise to ourselves, not only did we do that in the United States, we got 123 other countries to go along with us. Can we do the same thing with racial equality? Can we become the example for the world? Or is that just way too far away for us? Can we pull this off in a generation or two? What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Talk radio colleague Egberto Willies in the next segment, and also Joe Madison in the next hour. So, I think that this is like one of the literally existential questions of our time. I just, it's that really we're very much not looking at is that this is in our founding document. This should be the DNA of this country. And we don't hold it up like that. We don't like teach in our elementary schools in civics class or history class or just kind of basic stuff. We don't teach the idea that, oh yeah, democracy. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to us on KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I just called up to be disagreeable.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, you keep equating Confederacy and Nazis. And while they were co-equivalent in their racial views and promoting the same lie that human beings are different from one another, the two systems had a very big difference in one term, and that is state centralism. You remember Jefferson Davis's epitaph for the Confederacy?
I don't.
He said if the Confederacy fails, the epitaph should be put on its tombstone is died of a theory. And the theory, of course, is states' rights. Mm-hmm. Now, they had situations where there was heavy fighting in one state, and they needed war material from an adjoining Confederate state, and the governor of that rich Confederate state would say, no, this is our state's equipment. The Confederate Army can't have it. That was one of the reasons that the Confederate efforts failed. So in that respect, I say they're very different sort of animals. You did not have during the Third Reich Thuringia or Bavaria saying, no, we can't go along with that here. We're just going to opt out. Of course, if they had done that, they would have been, hoisted up without trial on their own gibbets. Are you saying,
Mike, that, because when I speak of the Confederacy, I speak of it as basically a nation. I mean, this is a group of states that got together and said, we are an ethno-state. We are a state that is defined by white power and white supremacy, and a collection of states, but we're operating as a country, the Confederated States of America, the CSA. I must be missing something, because Germany, had a bunch of states and they all operated together too. What's the difference?
The thing is that the Confederate States would refuse to cooperate.
With each other?
Yes.
I didn't know that. With regard to what?
With regard to
war material and things like that, transportation. But why?
Yeah.
Why would they refuse to cooperate with each other?
Pure greed and selfishness, just like Republicans today.
Okay. Can you point me to a good history on this, Mike? I'd like to learn more about it.
Well, I hear the music coming up, so I'll just ring off with this little riddle. How is William Rehnquist a comic opera judge?
I don't know, but I would like a history of the Confederate States not going along with each other. What's the answer to your riddle, Mike?
Well, I'll let anyone that wants to look it up.
Okay, thanks a lot. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at thomhartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at hartmannreport.com. And, of course, over at thomhartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program of thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Egberto Willies. He is an activist, radio talk show host, a blogger, a writer. His new book, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors. EgbertoWillies.com is his blog. Politics Done Right is the name of his show. And politicsdoneright.com is the website for that. You can tweet him at Egberto Willies. Egberto, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked on the air. Anyway, you and I talked on the phone on Sunday. I'm curious your thoughts on this question that I'm laying out, that America at its birth made two declarations. One, that we can govern ourselves democratically. The second, that all people are created equal and should have equality under the law. That second one, we've never really, until 1965, we really didn't do anything to embrace. I'm curious your thoughts on the possibility of America rising above being basically a white-run ethno-state.
I love the way that you started it, Tom, because the way you brought it in earlier on, you said we've accomplished the first part. How do we accomplish the second part? And I think what's interesting about that is when the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was written, I think they really meant what they said, right? All people are created equal. All that good stuff sounded right, but that didn't mean they didn't consider the natives people. They didn't consider black people.
Right.
They deep in their hearts, there was something that didn't make those people people. So they were living to their creed. They just hadn't really considered the others real people. So what I really think is that you have to start building not on sand but on rock. That's the kind of things that I learned when I was younger. So what I really think is that if you get all people to realize that all people are people, I think it is easier then to have all those tenets realized. So I think that is where I think that is our biggest task, and I think we've accomplished a lot of that. But there's a whole lot more to really let people believe that that is the reality.
And that's substantial. I mean, because while there is this debate, it's not even a debate. While the white supremacists are running around going, white people are superior to everybody else, the subtext is not, the bell curve. The subtext is humanity versus inhumanity, is it not?
Absolutely so. I mean, and I think that is the important thing. On a lot of the things that I write on the show, I always like to tell this little story, right? I have a black sister that there's a possibility. This is how I start establishing equal humanity. I have a black sister that there's a good chance that I couldn't give her a heart. But yet, Tom, you as a white person, there's a good possibility that your heart will work in her. So those are sort of the things that you first get around the cultural thing and get into the science thing that first get the person realizing that sort of thing. And then after that, you can really get into the other things that make us equal. Now, you made an interesting point earlier in your show when you said that a lot of people are scared of equality, because I think a lot of people already understand the previous tenet that I brought up. But that question that you asked, are they going to treat me the way I treated them?
Right.
And to answer that, I have always used South Africa as an example, where I don't think the white people in South Africa, who were really, really terrible to the natives
for a long time.
And I don't see them going through any issues, really, right?
Not in a big way. I mean, there was some land redistribution that some of them are upset about, but yeah, I think South Africa has although it's still struggling as a democracy, and I think the major struggle in South Africa is because when they wrote their constitution, IBM offered them some lawyers to help them out, and they wrote into their constitution that corporations are people. So they're dealing with an oligarchy problem in South Africa. But it's not a racial one, it's a multinational corporate one. Egberto, Willies, we have a little less than a minute left. Your thoughts on how we best bring about this vision in America?
Well, I think the most important thing is that we don't lose hope. I don't want us to lose hope. I want people to start thinking, hey, we can accomplish this, because you know what, Thom, if you take a look throughout the country, things are not as bad as you see on TV. I speak to many of my Trump voters in this very red area where I live, and I tell you what, these people are people. And the truth of the matter is, when you speak to them on an individual basis, you find that there's a whole lot more in common. And I know that's a cliche, but guess what? That cliche is true. So I have a lot of hope. And with the work that you are doing and many others are doing by examining these issues, I think it really makes sense.
And you can check out Egberto's conversations like that over at politicsdoneright.com or egbertowillies.com. Egberto Willies, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
My pleasure, my friend. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls. Can America achieve our second promise? You think?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Or are we going to just slide backwards into GOP hate, fear, division, as a political strategy, and that's the end of that?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com. Of course, at HartmannReport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at HartmannReport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at ThomHartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at HartmannReport.com and ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So this also raises some really interesting questions. Number one, the obvious question that I laid out at the very beginning, and I'm going to pick up your phone calls in just a second here. Number one, is it possible that America can actually become a pluralistic, plural as in more than one, right? Plural is like two or more, a pluralistic society. And there's, a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society where everybody has equal rights and those equal rights are respected across the board by our institutions like police, government, business, and by people, just as part of our culture. Is that possible? Number one. I think it is. And I think we've seen a number of examples around the world where this has happened. And although, probably Cuba is the best example of countries that I've visited where I see a functioning multiracial society. But you could argue, our political system is so different than theirs that maybe that's not the best example. So, okay, I still think it's possible. And I think that parts of America have demonstrated that it's possible. And certainly American institutions like the military or the post office have demonstrated that it's possible. Which then raises a second question. If we accept that it's possible, and again, I acknowledge that's an open debate, and I know some of you, want to say, no, as long as there's Republicans out there, it ain't going to happen. But if we can accept that it's possible and even, embrace it as a country, as policy, what do we do then with our international policy? How do we respond to other countries that say, no, only people who are of a particular race are allowed to have citizenship here? Like Saudi Arabia. Not just to pick on Saudi Arabia, as most of the countries in the Middle East, actually. If you're not of their religion or of their race or of their, fill in the blank, their particular sect, you're SOL, you're in big trouble. Should we change our foreign policy with regard to this? And how do we help those countries? There are clearly countries that don't want pluralistic multiracial societies. There are a number in fact, Viktor Orban, for example, in Hungary, has made white supremacy the cornerstone of his Fidesz, of his political party. It's like the Confederacy took over America. That's Hungary right now. A member of NATO, a member of the European Union. Which is kind of problematic. But what should our posture be with regard to these countries that are actively trying to stop racial pluralism, that are pouring trolls into Facebook and Twitter to say, no chance, no, it's not possible, you don't, give it up, don't, etc. How do we deal with all this stuff? Sharon in Hampton, Virginia. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Yes, Tom, I do believe it's possible, but we have to call a lie a lie. That's one. Number two, we got to stop coddling racism and right-wing fantasy and call it out for what it is, a lie. Yes, we need to teach critical race studies, women's rights, and civics, because that was taken out during the Ronald Reagan era with Bill Bennett. He took civics out of schools. And then also address the economic issues and why Black people don't have generational wealth in this country, even though we've been here so long.
Right.
Once those things are addressed, we can have a decent society here, but we got to stop coddling bad people.
Yeah, I am with you. And it seems like, calling them out as racists and Nazis and things just kind of inflates their sense of self.
Right.
I mean, do you have a better way to identify them? Anti-American.
Right.
I think they're fundamentally betraying their country, is what, by promoting racism.
Exactly. It's like when we're listening to the news, they're like going, around the bend about stuff. Don't do that. Call it what it is.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And we need to take the money out of our media and our politics.
Yeah. Yep. Sharon, thank you. Well said.
You're welcome.
Cindy in Houston, Texas. Hey, Cindy, what's on your mind?
Hi. Well, I'm very impressed with the last caller, because exactly what I want to talk about is something that she brought up. It has to do with the critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know about this, but here in the state of Texas, there is a law, or not yet. It hasn't gone to Senate yet, but it's called House Bill 3979. It has been passed now. And it's part of an effort, of course, by red state legislators to ban or limit the teaching of critical race theory. Right. I didn't know if you knew about that or not.
I did, yeah. Yeah.
You did? Okay. And so I don't know if people understand out there, but the purpose of critical race theory, the way I understand it, is for our teachers to be able to speak the truth of of our history.
Yep.
If we don't understand our history and we don't want to repeat.
Yeah, there's no, those who control the past control the future is essentially what's going on here.
Exactly. So I just want everybody out there to know that what critical race theory, what's happening here right now, it's kind of scary to me, because the problem that we have right now is every time we turn around, there's this, there's that, there's this. It's like a constant snowball.
Mm.
But if you take all of these little pieces, you put them together, it's all leading towards the what they're trying to control, and it's kind of scary. So I just wanted to let you know that is now passed, going to Senate. It is House Bill 3979,
mm-hmm.
and they want to limit or ban the critical race theory in the classrooms.
Right. I don't think these people who are writing these laws, Cindy, even know what the hell critical race theory means. And in fact, in academia, there's a debate about what it means. They just don't want anybody talking about the racial history of the United States. I mean, that's what it comes down
to.
They don't want the Native American genocide, the largest genocide in the history of the world, being taught. They don't want the Holocaust of slavery being taught. It's like they just don't want to go there, and they want to keep this whole beaver cleaver 1950s, isn't the world wonderful, fantasy of America, front and center. And to have everybody in their place, right? Including women, by the way, of all races.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes. Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And really quick, just get something out there really fast, is
Sure.
that the problem that they have, what they're trying to say is that they don't want the students to feel uncomfortable. They don't want the white students to feel uncomfortable. Just wanted I had to get that in there.
Yeah, which is pathetic. It's pathetic.
It is.
It's yeah.
It is.
Cindy, thank you for the call.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking to you. Thank you. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, do you have some thoughts on this?
I absolutely do. So just to remind people that our Constitution actually doesn't say that all men are created equal. It's the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
And so what is meant by all men is a contextual interpretation. So to remind people, legal doctrine is that what a law says is not limited to what the text of the statute says. It's also what courts have said about the law. And that holds true with the Constitution. It's not just what the Constitution doesn't say just what the text says. It's what the courts have said about the text. So I've asked this question on an article I wrote and put it on Facebook, which is reviewing the Dred Scott decision, where Chief Justice Roger Taney wrote, "The black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect." So now he says that the black man was never intended to be considered a citizen at the founding of the Constitution. So that's the court saying something about the Constitution. So technically, that's what the Constitution says in the
Right.
view.
And Abe Lincoln said, and I'm going to ignore that ruling.
Well, that's fine. But you see, the Civil War in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments did not overturn those words. So here's my question. This is the thrust of my question is, what percentage of people today, Americans today, do you think agree with those words of Roger Taney? 80%, 60%, 40%, 20%? I've never had anybody say less than 20%. Some people say 50%. I'm curious to know what the listeners think.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's a significant minority of white people, but, I don't know. And that's a good question for a poll. Paul, thank you. Thanks for the call. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your thoughts on all this right after this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Can we put ourselves together, and can we lead the world in racial harmony? And welcome back. Pete in Newport, Oregon. Hey, Pete, what's on your mind today?
Hi. So I'm wondering if you think that corporations are responsible for the growing racial divide. And I ask that because I also grew up in Michigan and live in Oregon now. And when in the 80s and 90s, before NAFTA really took off, most of my extended family worked in the auto industry. And I didn't see or hear any of the kind of things that we're hearing today. And in Newport, where we've got commercial fishing and fish plants, where all different races work together in unskilled labor jobs, I also don't see that racism. And it seems to me that as jobs and factories have moved out of the United States, unskilled white people are upset with their life, and they feel like they just need somebody to blame. And I think they should be blaming the corporations rather than other races.
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed to this effect and laid this out as a piece of it, maybe, I don't know, back in January, suggesting that one of the things that is making it easier for white racists to recruit is the destruction of the white middle class as a result of 40 years of Reaganism, which includes free trade. Which is, the cornerstone of Reaganism and conservative theology. I have since come to the conclusion that, a much bigger factor is just good old-fashioned racism, Pete. That it just, we just didn't talk about it out loud when you and I were growing up in Michigan. I mean, but there was plenty of racism in that state, and there, all across the country. And
how do you think people's financial situation increases their racism, or they're willing to talk about racism?
I think that when people of any race are experiencing hard times, economic hard times, it makes it much easier, makes them more vulnerable to somebody who comes along and says, hey, that guy over there is responsible. He's different from you. It's the joke I told yesterday about, there's a billionaire, a worker, a working guy and an immigrant sitting at a table with 100 cookies. And the billionaire takes 99 cookies, gives one cookie to the working guy, and then leans over and whispers to the working guy, hey, that immigrant wants your cookie. I mean, that's how it plays out, right? And that's essentially the message that they're delivering. And so while I don't think that economic difficulties are the basis of racism in the United States, or even the principal exacerbating factor, because you've got plenty of whites who are very affluent who are just as racist as poor whites from poverty-stricken parts of the country. I do think that it makes recruiting a hell of a lot easier, because it provides a kind of a news hook, a reality hook. Hey, your life is this way because of that guy, and it is, and that idea that, hey, poor white guy, your life is miserable because of that Hispanic person over there taking your job, or that black person taking your job, or that woman taking your job. That was a big sales pitch in the 70s, you'll recall. All of those are convenient for corporations to avoid everybody discussing the real issue, which is, why are we all being ripped off by these corporations? Why are they redlining and exacerbating, racial divides, for example? Why are they destroying the middle class, white, black, or whatever? They don't want to have those conversations. Why is it that corporations are buying politicians and buying legislation? They don't want to have those conversations. It's a whole lot easier for them to have a conversation about, hey, that guy wants your cookie. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day, there's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at hartmannreport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Will in Canoga Park, California. Hey, Will, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Point real fast. We got to use the language that definitely colors everything. With your upcoming guest, Joe always throws out this diatribe on how the good guys wear white hats, the bad guys wear the black hats. Right. Noam Chomsky wrote an incredible book, Manufacturing Consent. We have to stop calling this plantations. It sounds so really nice and dainty, like, oh, they're just planting things. They were concentration camps. You're right. Hundreds of years, so we cannot. And when I hear you say that, I'm like, Tom, no, it's not a plantation. It's a concentration camp.
And I have referred to them as concentration camps in the past. But Will, thank you. You're absolutely right. I need to fine tune my language a little better, and I'm totally with you. Thank you very much for that. Javon in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Javon, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm just calling about the issue regarding basically trying to get along with different races in this country. And I only see one main issue. We need to have equality in pay. We need to have equality in economic status. Without that, we're just constantly left looking at trying to find something wrong with the other group. The same thing if you go to a party and the first thing you ask is, what do you do for a living? And then you immediately judge a person based on their income or type of work.
Right.
And we've done that with our races in this country. We've made it so we've made it difficult for people to join the same conversation because we've already got them at a lower bar.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier there was this cartoon that I was talking about yesterday or this joke, where there's a billionaire, an average working guy, and an immigrant sitting at a table or sitting at a bar or whatever, and there's 100 cookies on the table in front of them. The billionaire takes 99 cookies, gives one cookie to the working guy, and then leans over and whispers to the working guy, "See that immigrant over there? He wants your cookie." And it's like, as long as, number one, this massive inequality exists, and number two, as long as the people who are perpetuating that kind of inequality, the giant corporations and billionaires would prefer that our conversations not include the fact that they've got 99 cookies and they're expecting us to fight over one. It's gonna persist. And as I said, I don't think that economic insecurity is the basis of racism at all, but I do think it makes recruiting a hell of a lot easier when we've seen about 12% of the American white middle class fall out of the middle class in the last 20 years as a result of Reaganomics. Fewer than half of all Americans are now in the middle class. Those folks who have fallen out of where they once were, that doesn't make them racist, but it makes, particularly the younger ones, it makes them very, very vulnerable to racist recruiting. And, it's a terrible thing. But, yeah, Javon, well said. Matt in Chicago. Hey, Matt, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to comment on the critical race theory. Obviously we need to teach it, and there needs to be some sort of centralized education process where everybody's teaching the same thing, because we've seen in the South how they've whitewashed the Civil War.
Oh, yeah.
If our kids, I'm raising 3 white males, if they don't feel uncomfortable from the history and we don't learn about it, we are destined to repeat it.
Yeah, and also not to remediate it, not to fix the harms caused by it. But yeah, I am absolutely with you, and I've told the story of when we lived in Atlanta and one of my kids came home from school and I said, "What did you learn today?" And he said, "We learned about the War of Northern Aggression." Like, oh God. So right. Yeah, we've got to get there. We absolutely have to get there. Thank you for that call, Nancy in Elkhart, Indiana. Hey, Nancy, we have about a minute left. What's up?
Well, Tom, I would like to know your opinion about, as you talked about what they can teach in the schools about teaching the truth. I can't believe that the teachers would actually go along with that. As a retired teacher, I know I wouldn't have, and many of my colleagues wouldn't have, but could that possibly be another thing that the Republicans, if it would go through, they might like to get their own kind of teachers in there and take over.
So you're saying you would have had no problem teaching the truth of the racial history of America, but you think that if Republicans have their, they've just banned teaching critical race theory in Texas, and I believe it's the second state to do so.
And if that would go through, I can't believe the teachers would actually go through with it. I think if they had a whole lot of teachers saying, no, this isn't going to happen.
It's going to be interesting to see, because if Texas, it's passed the Texas House, it's going to the Senate. If it gets signed into law by Greg Abbott, how do the history teachers in particular, but, because you have high school history classes, how are they going to respond to this? Is there going to be an uprising among teachers?
I can't imagine why not. We have more morals than the people in Congress.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Although that's a fairly low bar. But, yeah, absolutely. Nancy, thank you. An interesting question. Fascinating question. Nancy's thinking. Okay, we'll be back. I want to check in with Joe Madison and find out what his thoughts are on, the possibility that America could achieve the promise we hinted at, perhaps, at the founding of the Republic, and that we've been working toward, I think, fairly aggressively since 1965. Can we do it? We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South
just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Joe Madison, my colleague over on the on Sirius XM on channel 126, the Urban View channel, civil and human rights activist. JoeMadison.com is Joe's website. You can tweet him at Madison Sirius XM. And Joe, it's been a while since we've talked. It's great having you back on the program. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. I hope you and Louise are doing okay.
All is well so far, and I hope the same is true for you and Sherry.
We're back. You know, we're vaccinated, and we still wear that mask. And
there you go. This is our first week in the studio. We're back in the studio for our first week.
Well, wow. We may not get back in our studio until September.
Remarkable.
Remarkable. That's questionable.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I laid out a theory this morning in an op-ed I wrote, and I was talking about it in the first hour, and I wanted to get your take on it. And that is that America, in our Declaration of Independence, given the times, I mean, it was written by slaveholders, and we all get that. Their language and their actions were very, very different things. But basically, the Declaration of Independence makes two promises. The first is that, two promises. The first is that people can govern themselves. We don't need no stinking kings or queens or popes. We can govern ourselves. Thank you very much. And we've largely accomplished that, over 240 years. The second is that all people are created equal and therefore should have equal opportunity under the law. Now, it doesn't lay it out like that in the Declaration, and the Constitution even contradicted that, as did early law for, 100 years, 150, arguably 200 years. But is it possible that America could lead the world in accomplishing this? We have a couple of what appear to be successful multiracial societies in South Africa, in Cuba, some argue Malaysia, but most of the world is made up of basically ethno-states. You're a citizen of this country because of the way you look, or who you are, or where you came from, that kind of thing. Can America transcend that? Can we become the first really pluralistic, multiracial, multi-religious society successfully, and then become a standard for the world, the way we have with regard to democracy over 240 years? Do you think that's even possible? And if so, how do we get there?
Well, let's go back to the history. Let's start with history. Look, first of all, the man who wrote the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson, was a contradiction himself. I mean, let's start there. And didn't believe that, for all practical purposes, that anybody other than white men could govern, right, or be governed. And so, I think that's what people have to understand. The other issue that you bring up is that even Lincoln, the great emancipator, didn't believe, and if you read Lerone Bennett's books and history from the great Lerone Bennett, the historian who worked for years, decades for Ebony magazine, he writes how reluctant even Lincoln was.
Yes.
But having said that, to answer your question directly, yeah, I think that the United States of America, as a government, as a society, can do just what you suggested. It can be done. No ifs, ands, buts about it. But as I was listening to, just before coming on, your reading, the problem is it's up to the people. We those of us who understand that it can be done, we have to become activists. We have to, take control of our Congress. The propagandists are very good at what they do. I had a caller to my show who says, "Here's what they use, Tom. They dismiss, they discredit, they demonize, and then they destroy."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the Fox, as you say all the time, the talk show haters are. The talk show
hate radio guys, haters,
hate radio guys, and Fox. And understand, when you were talking about Germany, that's exactly what the Nazis did. They dismissed everybody. They discredited people who weren't with them. They demonized all the folks who wanted equality and opportunity, and then they destroyed. Now, what I believe, what I hope would happen, and that is that I hope these folks who we're talking about, I hope they destroy themselves. I mean, the Republican Party right now is in a shambles, and Tom, it is absolutely amazing. A year after George Floyd's murder, that the only group holding up the passage of that bill, that meeting today at the White House, should have been a bill signing ceremony.
Yep.
And there's only one reason it wasn't, and that is that you have Republicans who are more afraid of Donald Trump's base than they are of the majority of their constituents.
Which is the white racist base in America, if I may interrupt.
You are one. You're not interrupting. You are absolutely 100% correct.
Yep.
And so that's where we are. But I believe your theory. I believe what you wrote today is absolutely right.
So,
but
Joe,
I think we also have to be honest about history.
Oh, yeah, and I'm trying to be, very much so. I mean, it wasn't until 1965 that we actually did away with racial quotas on immigration. I mean, you could really say that 65 was the year when America finally embraced this promise. So we have 2 minutes to a hard break, Joe. Where would you begin with this? It seems to me like reparations would be a piece of this. You know, economic equality. We have to put law into place. You know, justice equality. We have to reform police. Where do we begin?
Well, all of the above. All of the above. It's not a question of one or the other. It's all of the above. Right. You mentioned South Africa. Understand that one of the things that South Africa did once it dismantled apartheid, they did what? They had what they call truth and reconciliation. Right. What we've never had in the United States of America is truth and reconciliation.
You're right.
We have to have that. Now, what form does it take? I don't know. I don't know exactly what form it takes, but it's got to be more than just an intellectual exercise.
Can you imagine Lindsey Graham having to get up and give a speech and apologize for the racism of the Republican Party, essentially in order to continue to be a functioning member of society like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did?
Hell, I can't even imagine Tim Scott doing it. And the only thing, I mean, the only thing I can imagine, Lindsey, what I imagine is Lindsey Graham one day being defeated.
Yeah,
and not in Congress. And I bring up Tim Scott because Malcolm X always had a saying that whenever a black man stands up and speaks out against racism and white supremacy, the other side always finds some other black person to contradict what they say.
Right.
That's part of history, too. Race and reconciliation on a meaningful scale is what this country first has to do.
Yep, I agree. I think that absolutely brilliant. The great Joe Madison. Joe, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
Thank you.
And be sure to check out Joe's show. Hang on just a second. I'll give you the details.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Every weekday, 6 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Sirius XM Channel 126. Joe Madison, the Black Eagle. We'll be back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Kylie in Marietta, California. Hey, Kylie, what's up?
Oh, I just love your show.
Thank you.
And I have a few things I wanted to say real quick. One about your racism. One thing we could do is show how other cultures have made America great again. And then another thing is to have them focus on themselves, make themselves valuable, and then therefore they can get the jobs they want. But what I really want to talk about was that you said that now it's a crucial time in America, and I really think it is, because we all can see what's happening. There are laws that are being passed that are unconstitutional, and there are senators and representatives and congressmen who clearly, on video, just like the other insurrectionists, who were caught on video and stuff like that, and yet they're not being held accountable for what they said or what they did. Right. And somehow we have to wait until their end of their term to be voted out before anything can be done. They committed crimes, and just like the other insurrectionists who are now being prosecuted, but nothing's being done. And we, as the normal people, we all see this, and we all see that it's unfair, but feel very helpless to get any justice for the majority of the people who voted for Biden.
So you're tying basically the prosecution of the insurrectionists to any kind of forward motion? and holding accountable the Republicans who might have supported them? Is that the essence of what you're saying, Kylie?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Is like if you hold office, you could apparently be an insurrectionist and encourage them and encourage all this, lies about the big steal, right? And not really be held accountable. We have to wait until here comes another vote. We have to.
No, I get it.
I get it. Why aren't they being arrested?
Well,
they're caught in video too.
Yeah. Apparently, some of the videos were destroyed, but it's a whole larger issue. But Kylie, I'm with you, and I think that we need to be holding them accountable. Kylie, thank you so much for the call. Egon in, am I saying that right, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania? Egan?
You got it.
Egon.
Yeah, you got
it.
it.
Hey, what's up?
Hi. Well, about racism and the possibility for pluralistic society, I'm looking at my Senator Bob Casey's Facebook post today, and it was just saying that it would be a great thing to honor George Floyd by passing the George Floyd Justice
in Policing Act, right?
Yeah, and the comments on this post are incredibly racist, and a vast majority are racist.
Right.
And they're not all, old white men that are. I look up some of these pictures of these people. They're, 30-ish white people.
Yeah.
I live in a pretty liberal city. I don't expect to meet a racist in my city, but Lancaster County is pretty well known for being Republican, so there may be some out there.
Yeah.
And
you're seeing an organized movement, Egon. That's what you're seeing, an organized white racist movement. And it's not just a U.S.-based movement. It's an international movement. And they have, set up home in Facebook. And Facebook has, in some ways tried to do something about it, in other ways not. And but that's what you're seeing. Egon, I got to run. Thanks for the call. Up next, Kymone Freeman. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So, we have our regular newsletter that you can find over at ThomHartmann.com that has Sue's Daily Stack in it, which lists a link to every article, every story that I talked about on, whatever it may be on the program that day. And then there's also my daily rant, which can come into your email box. No advertisements, no cost, over at HartmannReport.com. In addition to that, we have a weekly video that we post over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. And the one this week is particularly fascinating. A federal judge has said that Betsy DeVos has to come in and sit for a 3-hour deposition. Now, the Biden Justice Department said former cabinet secretary shouldn't have to do this. And the judge said, no, the record keeping was so shoddy during the Trump administration. So what's up next? Well, let's hope it's Bill Barr being dragged before a court. You can check it all out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's the one-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder. We've been talking about race in America here throughout the program. I think it's a crucial issue. Wanted to check in with Kymone Freeman, the program director and a host at We Act Radio, our Washington, D.C. affiliate, and an activist with Black Lives Matter D.C. WeActRadio.com, of course, and the Twitter handle at We Act Radio, at BLK Lives Matter, or at Guerrilla Artists, Guerrilla TIST, right? Kymone, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
Always a pleasure, Brother Tom.
Thank you. I'm curious your thoughts on the possibility that we can get through this. It seems to me like we're almost at one of these, not almost, that Trump, by essentially freezing or reversing, in fact, the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act that made our immigration policy colorblind, and by promoting all the racial tropes and stereotypes that he did throughout the campaigns and throughout his presidency, was very much trying to push America back pre-65 into being a white-run ethno-state. And I think, frankly, if he gets, or any other Republican gets the White House in 2024, that's back where we're going to go. And yet, the Biden administration has said, no, we're going to embrace this 1965 to 2016 period of racial plurality in America. As a activist with Black Lives Matter, what's your sense of where we're at?
Well, as a student of Thom Hartmann University, I think that the whole statement of what do you call a failed coup attempt, a rehearsal, I think from what happened on January 6th, this is America's reckoning, and we have to acknowledge that this is our attempt to either dismantle white supremacy once for all, or we're going to have a right-wing fascist country. But let's not forget that the Minneapolis Police Department was burned to the ground. We had worldwide protests of another full video of a lynching, state-sanctioned violence. We've seen these videos before from Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, but there was something unique about this one, about the false police reports that we've all heard about. Ida B. Wells, the great Louis lynching activist, Ida B. Wells said that those who commit the murders write the reports. Well, we all held our breaths when George Floyd verdict, because this is still America. And the first statement that the Minneapolis Police Department released about George Floyd's murder did not mention any use of force. It described, I believe, was a medical distress.
Right.
And so we need to point this out, because we often hear in the defense of police officers, oh, it's just a few bad apples and da-da-da-da. Well, I don't know about others, but I grew up hearing a continuation of that. It said a few bad apples spoils the whole bunch.
There you go, the whole barrel, yeah. Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
And so we have this new law. I think it's the Carroll law, where this officer from Buffalo, New York, who actually intervened, a good cop intervened in a bad cop choking someone, possibly preventing their death, and she was fired and lost her pension, and she just recently got it back. So now we're changing that culture so that good cops can they have to have a law for good cops to actually defend innocent people from bad cops.
Yeah, which is an amazing thing when you think about it, that it would even be necessary. And yet, I've heard people say 10% of cops are bad, 10% of cops are great, and 80% of cops are, just punching the time clock and not willing to make waves. And therefore, you could throw them in with the bad guys because they're facilitating them, which is 90%. I don't have any idea what the actual numbers are, and I'm not sure anybody does.
Well, I'll tell you what, the FBI had a 2006 report, and as you well know, the FBI is no friend of human rights and civil rights, but they even acknowledged in a 2006 report that law enforcement has been infiltrated, quote unquote, by white supremacists.
Yes.
And we have not done anything about that. We had a 21st Century Police Task Force under the Obama administration, did nothing about that. And we need to acknowledge the reality. I think that we are operating from a faulty premise that, all cops are not bad. That's not the premise that we should be operating from when we said that FBI says law enforcement is infiltrated by white supremacists. It's like, it goes back to the fact that Europe is not a continent. That's a shocking statement to people until they look at that map and realize that we all have been miseducated to arrive at a faulty conclusion because we're starting from a faulty premise. I mean, many of our police departments around America are actually trained in Israel. A lot of people don't know that. Who also has a history of state-sanctioned violence and human rights violations. And these are things that we need to point out. And I think that George Floyd was possibly the straw that broke the camel's back. I still don't have the reason why, because we've seen so many times of these state-sanctioned murders on camera, but I think it was because it was slow. I think that was what was different. Everything before was fast. This one was slow and excruciating, and we all kind of shared those minutes together. And I think that's what made this one different.
Yeah, I think you're right. It evoked an empathetic response right across the board that highlighted our common humanity rather than splitting us apart. Kymone Freeman, program director, host at We Act Radio in Washington, D.C., weactradio.com, and an activist with Black Lives Matter in D.C. Kymone, thanks a lot for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
Thanks for the work you do. Take care.
Back at you. We'll be back. Pick up your phone calls and thoughts right after this. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back in just a moment. Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, in light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Gene in Abilene, Texas. Hey, Gene, what's on your mind?
Tom, I'm an 81-year-old black man, retired from the military, 20 years in the Air Force, Vietnam veteran. And I want you to consider racism and Christianity and the effect that it had on slavery in the United States of America. I ordered a Bible. It is the King James Version of the original African Heritage Bible. And the only place that I could find this Bible was on Amazon. All the places you can buy Bibles in Abilene, you cannot buy this Bible in Abilene, Texas. What do you think of that?
I don't know about that Bible, Gene. Can you tell me something? I know what the King James Version is, but I didn't know that there was an African version of that. Do you mean in another language, or do you mean that it has been basically reinterpreted?
It is in the English language, and let's see here. It was, let me see. The general editor is Kane Hope Felder, Ph.D. He's the professor of the New Testament languages and literature, Howard University, Washington, D.C.
Huh. Yeah, coming out of Howard, it's probably pretty solid stuff. I don't know. I do know that Christianity has been used to justify slavery for thousands of years. It was used to justify the enslavement of Africans and Native Americans in the United States, principally Africans. The whole Mark of Cain thing was, adopted and held by the Mormon Church up until the mid-1980s, as I recall, maybe the late 1970s. The whole, just go back to picking cotton and Jesus will be fine with you when you die stuff was, a big deal back in the day. There are those who argue that Christianity was a very handy tool for a slaveholding class in the United States at one point in time. Is that where you're going with this, Gene, or is it that a Bible that has an African-American interpretation, subtext, commentary on the Bible is generally unavailable?
It's all in English.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, it's just amazing that nobody is familiar with this. And as many books as you've got, and you author it like that, I would expect this book to be, to be familiar with it.
I will look for it. Gene, give me the title again.
It is the original African Heritage Edition of the Holy Bible, the King James Version.
Okay, the African Heritage Edition. Gene, I'll look for it. Gene, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you. Stephen in Monroe, North Carolina. Hey, Stephen, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. The question that I have for supporters of critical race theory and other opponents of the Texas bill is how many of them have actually read it and understand what it does? I mean, there's 8 concepts that the bill bans. I'd like to read just 3 of them, the first 3.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm really not prepared to debate this with you because I haven't read them. I'll just put that right up front. So I can't, vouch for the veracity, for the truth or for the untruth of anything that you're saying here.
Well, then I would suggest that.
But I will look into it.
Check out HB 3979.
Okay.
And tell me and they can tell you whether I'm lying when the first 3 concepts that's banned are: 1, one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. 2, an individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. And 3, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partially because of the individual's race.
So all 3 of those statements that you just said that they can't discuss in a classroom, Stephen, all 3 of those statements are the predicating assumptions of the behavior of this country for 200 and some odd years. And you're saying that this Texas law says that those things may not be discussed in a classroom. Do I have that right?
Well, it says they cannot require or make part of a course.
Right. So you may not discuss in a classroom the fact that white people in this country for 240 years thought they were the superior race and put it into law.
Earlier in the bill, it says a teacher may not be compelled to discuss current events or widely debated, currently controversial issues.
Stephen, we're splitting hairs, and as I said, I have not read the law, so I'm just going to put an end to this conversation right now, and we can pick it up maybe a little later in the week or next week. But I will go out of my way now. Thank you, Stephen, for that, to track down that Texas legislation and read it. Kusai in Campo, California. Hey, Kusai, what's up?
How you doing?
Good.
Just wanted to point out that pretty much the core of racism began with the religion itself. I don't mean to make light of it, but God, everywhere he went, he told them they're his favorite, they're his favorite, they're his favorite. So the religion started out by being already superior to the other guys.
And that's true of almost every religion, and not just religion, by the way, cultures. I mean, when you go back and you look at the creation stories of Native peoples all over the world, Every single tribe, every single group, every single community, every single religion, when you get down to a group of people who share a common creation story, the first person was always them, right? The first person on earth, just like in Genesis, the first person happens to be Jewish. And by the way, there's this, when they expelled Cain after he killed Abel, when they expelled Cain from town, he went off and married a woman from the next town over. So wait a minute, whose creation story is this, really? I get your point.
And then when politics became the norm, everybody politicized the religions, and the way they refer to the Middle Eastern problem, it's not a Muslim-Jew issue at all, but that's the best way to present it for all the powers that are going to benefit from it.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Kusai. Jerry in Kissimmee, Florida. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm a retired educator, and I know the gentleman was just talking about the bill in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the facts on which states, but this is based on what I've read as an article, as a synopsis. One of the states, it could be Iowa, if a teacher teaches it, because one of the callers was saying, well, teachers can just go and teach this, you'll be fired. And another state, it could be Texas, there's a $5,000 fine to teachers who would teach not only critical race theory, but going off on another area like the previous caller talked about, which is actually in the bill. So as an example, back to when I was teaching, if a student brought up, let's say in middle school, oh, well, I just don't really understand why blacks had to go to the back of the bus. What was the reason for this? And you're trying to explain to them, putting in the context of time so they could understand it. This is the way the country was. White people had these rights, from voting to having a job, everything. That's going to be considered teaching racism against white people, which is ridiculous. How can you teach the American history? It's impossible.
Well, and I think that's the point. Why? Does Texas have such a problem with public school teachers teaching their children that whites are the superior race that they need to pass a law to stop it? I don't think so. But they apparently have a problem. The Republican legislators in Texas apparently have a problem with the students being taught in Texas that for most of the history of the United States, that was taught, number one, in our schools, and number two, that white people believed that and based a government and an economic system on it. I mean, Jerry, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Like I said, I got to read the law, and I will do so. Anyhow, 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back. In the next hour, we've got fascinating, geeky science for you, by the way, about Monsanto and Roundup. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. And Pam in Chicago, I'm going to pick up your call in 4 minutes on the other side of the break when WCPT rejoins, because I see you're listening on WCPT. Dave in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Watch this on YouTube. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I'd really like to see racial equality in the United States, but I just question how we get there, because it's my feeling that, well, it's not my feeling that at least 25% of Americans make less than $25,000 a year. Are we supposed to just shuffle minorities out of that bracket and exchange them with? How do we get there? Shouldn't the real question be?
How about eliminating that bracket, Dave?
What's that?
Instead of saying moving black people out of poverty and moving white people into poverty, which is the argument, the Jews will not replace us, blacks will not replace us, of the white supremacists marching in Charlottesville. How about just eliminating that, people making under 25 grand when they're working full-time category? Why not just raise the minimum wage?
Well, Well, I agree with that. I think the better path to that is having the government step in and give guaranteed jobs and have floor wages.
Yeah. So I'm not sure I understand your question then.
My question is how are we supposed to fight for equality, or racial or otherwise, when so many people are making so little money?
Well, I see this as a multi-dimensional problem. Number one, we need to be teaching the actual history of the United States so that, our young people growing up actually have a clear-eyed understanding of where we came from and how we got here. And then number two, we need to deal with how we got here, with where we're at right now, which is where the average black family in America has family wealth of less than $5,000. The average white family in America has family wealth of over $100,000. That minorities and women make less than white men do, just right across the board. That there are entire categories of economic opportunity that people are largely blocked out of due to race or gender. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these issues that I think are all interrelated that need to be addressed. And the way that we do policing in this country is with regard to race is absurd. So we need to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We need to rebuild America from the bottom up in a way that includes everybody. We need to build back better, to use Joe Biden's phrase. And we need to be looking at ways to undo the harm of 400 years of stealing the labor and wealth of an entire group of people based on their race, or based on their national origin originally, and their race as well. In other words, people who were stolen from Africa, taken out of Africa, and brought here against their will, and forced into slavery. So,
but I'm just saying, go on protest and say I want equality for minorities. You can't have it in a system where people are making so little. And I don't agree with the minimum wage. I think that government should guarantee work and try to make it more meaningful. 80% of the people have anxiety because their jobs have no meaning. So I think we should have a floor wage established by the government and do away with the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Or anybody.
Well, okay. I think it's a semantic argument, Dave. And by the way, the last study I saw was that a little over half of Americans find meaning in their work. So I think your 80% number is off. But, double check it on the internet. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. I'll be back in just 1 minute. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about conspiracy theories. Abby Richards came up with a kind of a hierarchy of conspiracies, maybe a variation on the old Maslow hierarchy. And it goes from actual conspiracies to maybe this was a conspiracy, maybe not, we have questions, to this is kind of crazy stuff, but who knows, flying saucers, for example, to actual science denial, conspiracy theories that actually serve to promote the interests of a particular industry or wealthy individuals, to the totally crazy stuff, the flat earth, the reptilian overlords and all that kind of thing, conspiracy theories that can do tremendous damage. And, one of those being one of the conspiracy theories that, brought two Republicans into Congress this year. So anyhow, I lay the whole thing out with a new video for our supporters over at ThomHartmann.com. Alaska, what do you got? And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey, Pam.
So much. And then listening to the callers and just getting information. So first, George Floyd, his murder, and the many others, Tom, it leaves an impression. And it's almost, you can't really express it in words. And being a black woman here in Chicago, I'm at a point now with the police, Tom, and I've said this to you before. My senior citizen relatives do not want the police called in the event that there is some type of trouble.
Right.
That's dangerous in itself.
Yep.
So when we talk about racism and all that this has done, I'd like to think I'm trying to express something so that people get it. Because I'm serious about racism and speaking about it. I don't sugarcoat it. It's not uncomfortable for me. It is up to the white community to eradicate racism.
Yep.
And it's not about me hating white people, because it seems like when we talk like this, we're militant or something is wrong. No, you all have to make the effort to do that. Now, you had one caller who said, make America great again. Tom, America was great for whom?
Exactly.
Because, so I want people to really reflect and think about those statements. You had your previous caller talk about racism and bringing equality through, increasing the minimum wage or maybe universal income. But here's the thing, Tom. We've been able to compete. But if the opportunity doesn't present itself because of racism, then that's a whole nother element.
Mm-hmm.
So if we take the opportunity to get the education, are we going to get the job? Or are we not going to get a call back with our resume because it's from a specific zip code? Or I have a last name that sounds black. I mean, these are the macro and microaggressions the larger majority has to get. And I'm going to offer this. We cannot truly heal until you talk about some type of reconciliation and contrition. I remember Dr. Cornel West stating that the one thing that Germany got right is there was some contrition about the Holocaust.
And the same with South Africa.
Yes. And that doesn't exist in this country yet. And I don't know if it ever will. So I'm telling people, Tom, I hope I can do this. PBS, and I don't know the person, had a documentary. It was a trilogy, Rust, and it was just referring to the Rust Belt, R-U-S-T. Mm-hmm. And Tom, it so eloquently presented about the enslavement of black people, the economic advantages to this country. Then it took it through to FDR, all the things that the white community benefited from, all the programs that we didn't. So I want to help white America really get an education so that they can really come to some real conclusions and see how this country was built for you and continues to benefit. And it's not about hating. It is about we're trying to coexist in peace, like our ancestors, like the civil rights organizations taught us, like Dr. King taught us. And so I'm just asking white America, you've got to learn the history. You've got to do that, or else you really won't come to an understanding. Racism was profitable for this country. This country was built on the enslavement, yes. The indentured enslavement, immigrants, paying low-grade wages to immigrants.
Yep.
It was built on that. So, Tom, I'm just asking, as they tell us, black people, we've got to go to school, get the education, you all go to a real school of black history and get this information. And you continue, Tom, also to bring on guests who talk about this. Because that is important.
Oh, I'm absolutely all about that, Pam. And I realize that the majority of my audience is white, and I think that I think you're absolutely right. This is a white person's problem. This is, it's a black person's problem, but it's created by white people, and it's.
And if you hate me and think I'm inferior, then you have to question yourself as to why, because you know that is not true.
Exactly.
With the accomplishments of black people.
Exactly.
You know those two things cannot exist in the same space.
Yep. And so we've got a lot of work to do, Pam, you and me.
Tom, we absolutely do. And all I'm asking is because the violence perpetrated on us by the police, it is, I can't even describe it, what it's presenting to us. But what I would like, and I'll end with this, the George Floyd Act, Tom, there has to be That's a start. But we have to talk about removing and identifying some of the racist elements on these police forces.
Yes. Yeah.
Just like they vetted for Joe Biden, you have to vet this entire country, all of law enforcement.
Like they did with the Secret Service. I'm with you. I'm completely with you. Pam, thank you. It's always nice to hear from you, and you always get right to the point. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. It's, we've got just a fascinating piece here on what's going on with Monsanto, and then we'll get back to our conversation.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true. certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what an extraordinary day we've been having, huh? And a lot of fascinating conversation we will get back to. I just was reading this Texas law. I'll share that with you after the break, too. But Bill Freese is on the line with us right now. He's a science policy analyst with the Center for Food Safety. Center for FORFoodsafety.org is the website. And the Twitter handle is CFS True Food. And Bill, welcome back to the program. Monsanto appears to be making, the Biden EPA and Monsanto and Roundup, there's something going on here. Tell us about it.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's kind of a long story, and it began over 10 years ago in 2009. And basically, the EPA is supposed to review every pesticide every 15 years, right? So glyphosate's turn came up in 2009.
Isn't glyphosate an herbicide, not a pesticide?
Yeah, sorry, but pesticide is a blanket term that
includes herbicides.
Weed killers as well.
Forgive the interruption.
Oh, no, that's okay. So anyway, this is, so EPA began this comprehensive review of glyphosate in 2009. This usually takes about 5 years. It's a long process, but they still haven't completed it, right? And basically they're supposed to take account of new science, look at whatever new laws and regulations have been passed, and then make a decision on whether, the pesticide should be continued. There should be perhaps restrictions put on its use, whatever, based on, this review. So anyway, they were dragging their feet tremendously, and they finally came out with an interim decision early last year in 2020, and we sued. This was basically their big approval of glyphosate, and we sued them. And so this was all, that was under Trump's EPA. And then when the Biden administration came in, they decided they needed to take a look at all of the litigation against the government that was, underway at that time, as you can imagine, given some of the things that the Trump administration has done. And on glyphosate, unfortunately, they chose to, continue to litigate. So that lawsuit is ongoing. And what they did just recently, to bring us up to date here, is they asked the court in our case, right? We're suing the EPA saying glyphosate is bad news. It's bad news for farmers' health. It can cause cancer, right? That's been well established, and it's also caused a lot of ecological harm. Endangered species are imperiled, and there are also a lot of costs. Like glyphosate-resistant weeds are a tremendous problem for farmers, and that's
We just lost Bill. Okay. We'll see if Joyce can get it back on the line. But glyphosate, by the way, if you're not familiar with exactly what it is, it's an herbicide. It kills weeds, right? Kills plants, broadleaf plants, and it's sold under the brand name Roundup. And there was a massive lawsuit against Bayer, which makes and sells it just a while ago, saying that it causes cancer, showing studies that it causes cancer. There are also some fascinating studies suggesting that glyphosate may even be, a principal cause of celiac disease by virtue of it basically altering or changing our intestinal flora. And there are some who are speculating that our gut flora is also one of the things that regulates obesity in the United States. Now, I haven't seen any specific, science or literature on this. Bill is back with us. Bill Freese is back with us. So, Bill, you were talking about the EPA is basically still going along with Monsanto. Is that to boil it down? Is that basically what's going on?
Yeah, they seem to want to get the court to give them the opportunity to redo some of their assessments. And in our view, they're doing this because they want to be able to try to better defend themselves in court.
Is this
not because they want to make any beneficial changes to either cancel registrations or reduce rates or have restrictions.
One of the things that we see every time we have a Republican administration, we saw this with the Reagan administration, we saw this with the both Bush administrations, and we certainly saw it with the Trump administration, is that they stack regulatory agencies with scientists, or in the case of Trump, just open lobbyists, put them in charge of these administrations and bury in their management and leadership hierarchy basically toadies for the industry that are being regulated. Ajit Pai over at the FCC, former Verizon lawyer, for example. Is that what's going on here? Is EPA still filled with Trumpists, with Trump humping science deniers, or is this? Or is this, are they regular scientists who are hoping to get a job at Monsanto? I mean, what's going on? Why are they doing this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, there might not be one simple answer, but it's interesting that you mentioned this because in the Trump EPA, you're exactly right. The pesticide division was filled with industry people who the Biden administration has even admitted, you know, interfered in the science with certain pesticide decisions. Now, they don't admit that with this glyphosate registration, but they do with another dicamba that we've been involved in and I think that we spoke of on a previous call. So, you know, they even, you know, identified the officials. There were 3 of them, senior level people, like assistant deputy administrator level, right, for the EPA. And so what's remarkable is, you know, that they've admitted that, and now they're
those people are
making
gone
a big
now,
show
right?
of scientific. Pardon?
Those people, these industry shills are gone now from the EPA, aren't they?
Yeah, they're gone.
Okay.
They're gone. Yeah, so, you know, that's good. That, you know, we should,
Step
you know,
one.
be thankful for that. But the EPA now is making a big show of scientific integrity, and yet, you know, in the case of this other herbicide that's caused all this drift damage, dicamba, that, you know, they've stood behind the Trump's administration's latest approval of that herbicide. And here with glyphosate, yeah, they're sticking with their denial of, you know, glyphosate's cancer risk, which has been, you know, found by the international authorities on cancer, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And
let's be very clear, glyphosate is in virtually all of our food, is it not?
The residues of glyphosate, yeah, they're very widespread because the herbicide is used on so many different crops.
Has there been?
You know,
go ahead.
It varies quite a bit.
Has there been any further research on the work that Stephanie Seneff and Anthony Samsel did about glyphosate and gluten intolerance, for example? We started putting glyphosate on wheat, and all of a sudden there's this explosion of what looks like celiac disease or other non-cancer conditions.
Yeah, you know, I think the cancer connection is the most solid one. Right. You know, I think, unfortunately, there are some researchers out there who are kind of relying on correlation a lot that you know you can't really use to show that a chemical causes harm. So there's been a lot of stuff. I think cancer is good, and there's also good evidence that glyphosate is harmful, you know, like to the liver and the kidney, which kind of makes sense because they're detoxification organs, right?
So, Bill, we have 20 seconds. Where are we at with this, and how can Americans interject themselves as activists if they want to see this stuff seriously regulated?
Yeah, well, you know, please come to our website. You know, we're always getting our members involved, and you know, join Center for Food Safety. And yeah, we'll give you action alerts and kind of help inform you about the issues.
Great.
So you can
so
take
that's
action.
a great place to start. Center for Centerforfoodsafety.org is the website. Bill Freese, the senior science policy analyst. Bill, thanks for dropping by. It's always great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more in just a moment. And welcome back. 15 minutes past the hour. And 202-808-9925 is our telephone number. I want to get into this question of whether, in fact, I'm going to get into it right after this break, of whether COVID is going to become an ideology-associated disease. But just to back up a little bit on the glyphosate stuff, which I think is absolutely fascinating, is that this study that was done by Stephanie Seneff, and I'm looking at it. It was published in Interdisciplinary Toxicology on December 2013. And the title is Glyphosate: Pathways to Modern Diseases 2, Celiac, Sprue, and Gluten Intolerance by Seneff, S-E-N-E-F-F. And what they're pointing out is that the way that glyphosate works, the way that it kills weeds, is it interrupts a metabolic pathway in weeds that's necessary for them to process a particular nutrient and in order to survive. And if they can't process that nutrient, they die, and so that's how Roundup, glyphosate kills weeds. Well, according to this theory that they're putting forward, this is has to do with the P450 enzyme and all this kind of stuff. According to this theory, it does the same thing to bacteria. So when you spray glyphosate on a field or on a crop, you're not just killing the weeds, you're also killing the bugs in the soil that keep the soil alive. But perhaps more importantly, when you then eat food that has glyphosate in it, and as I said, they started spraying it on wheat in the late 1990s because it slightly increases what's called the yield. By killing the wheat just before it's harvested, the stalks get brittle, and the machines that chop the heads off, the grains off, actually work more efficiently. And so we all started eating glyphosate along with our wheat in the late 90s, and suddenly in the early 2000s, there's this explosion of celiac disease. And Stephanie Sent's theory is that it's messing with our gut bacteria as well as the soil bacteria. And by messing with our gut bacteria, it causes us not to be able to no longer have the gut bacteria that appropriately helps digest our food and absorb nutrients, but instead provides a space for pathogenic gut bacteria, typically that we pick up from food that we eat that came out of factory farms. This typically happens to people after eating a restaurant meal, where various bugs are just floating around inside the place, and that this is interpreted as celiac disease. And that the solution to that is to get the glyphosate out of our food supply, and that people's gut bacteria will then normalize, and that it's a fascinating. As somebody who since 2001 has had celiac disease, and prior to 2001 had no problem digesting wheat, I find this a compelling theory. So anyhow, I present it to you for what it's worth. We'll get back to our conversation. I want to talk about a pandemic, and also we'll get back to our conversation about race in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is, a whole fascinating, by the way, I just wanted to toss out another fascinating theory here, and then I'm going to pick up your phone calls. We'll continue our conversation about race in America, and we can talk about Roundup and glyphosate if you want. But the idea that increasingly we are starting to see a nation where COVID, where this pandemic, this deadly disease, is becoming a disease of ideology. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating. CNN Politics, this is Harry Enton doing the analysis over at CNN.com. And he says, of the top 25 states in terms of the percentage of people who are vaccinated, Joe Biden won 21 of them in the last election. Of the bottom 25 states in terms of vaccination, Trump won 21 out of the 25 bottom states. He won 16 out of the 17 bottom states. So the more likely a state is to be vaccinated, the more likely that state is to have voted for Biden. The more likely a state is to remain unvaccinated, the more likely that state is to have voted for Trump. And what's happening now, and here we have, you know, a new Marist, this is an NPR PBS Marist College poll earlier this month, showed that 82% of Democrats say that they are vaccinated, compared with 45% of Republicans. Biden backers, 82% are vaccinated. Trump supporters, only 44%. And then they break this down by education and all the other categories, but those are really just subcategories for how you break down the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats tend to be, you know, better educated and less likely to live rurally, and Republicans tend to be more poorly educated, more likely to be living in a rural setting. But now we're starting to see hotspots. Now we're starting, I mean, we're down to 500, 600, 700 deaths a day in our country. We used to be as high as 3,000 plus. We're down below 30,000 daily new infections. We used to be, you know, massively higher, well over 100,000. But increasingly, and I'm seeing the same thing here in Oregon. I get an email every day from the Oregon Public Health Department, and they lay out how many people were diagnosed with COVID in the previous 24 hours, how many people died, how many people are hospitalized, all, you know, all the stats. And they break it out, and then a little farther down, they break it out literally by county. And what I'm watching is absolutely fascinating, that the counties that are very blue, like, you know, Multnomah County, steadily falling numbers, just steadily falling numbers. I mean, collapsing. Fewer and fewer people getting diagnosed with COVID. Whereas some of the more rural counties, their numbers are going up, or they're staying the same. And it's looking increasingly like the Republicans are killing themselves off. And now what's really interesting is that the health insurance companies, who up until about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, had been saying, and this was, you know, part of policy that I believe was in the last, not the last COVID relief bill, but the one that was passed when Trump was president. Basically, it asked insurance companies not to bill people for COVID-related expenses. The government would pick up that tab. But the government's not picking up that tab anymore. And the insurance companies aren't picking up that tab anymore. And so you're starting to see people come out of the hospital having had COVID with $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 hospital bills that they can't pay, because people in red states don't have access to Medicaid because the red state governors won't expand Medicaid. And they're less likely to have purchased health insurance through Obamacare exchanges. So basically, they're less likely to have insurance. And this, the people that it's not killing, I mean, you know, it's only killing 1%, but it's permanently disabling a much larger percentage. We still don't have the, you know, really good numbers on that, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 20% of people are long-term disabled by having had COVID. But then on top of that, you're getting people who are coming out of the hospital who are going to be in debt for the rest of their lives. And this is increasingly happening to Republicans, to Fox News viewers, to right-wing hate radio listeners in red states. And the blue states are getting their act together, and people are getting vaccinated, And in blue states, you're seeing the numbers of infections starting to collapse. And I don't know where this is going to go. And I don't know if there's going to be a come to Jesus moment for Fox News. You know, we still don't know if Tucker Carlson got his vaccine. Hell, we wouldn't know to this moment if Trump had been vaccinated, if somebody hadn't squealed on him in the White House. Both him and Melania and their son were all vaccinated in the White House. I believe their son.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So are we going to find out? So we got a lot to talk about. There's race, there's the disease, there's glyphosate. We'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. It's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. In the weeks after 9/11, Rodale Press reached out to a bunch of folks, me, the Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Rabbi David Wolpe, Thich Nhat Hanh, Chuck Colson, Neil Donald Walsh, and asked for thoughts about a spiritual response to the attack on America. The result was a book, From the Ashes. And this is from the chapter that I wrote, The Goddess of Democracy, a Sacred Archetype to Heal the World. People argue that the terrorist attacks against the United States reflect a war between one religion and another, or between the poor and rich of the world. While there may be an element of truth to each, I'd suggest that the real war here is between the 11th century and the 21st century. And while our leaders, and until our leaders figure that out, we may miss some great opportunities. Back in the Dark and Middle Ages, the Catholic Church ruled Europe. Women were often forbidden to go out in public unless properly covered, and were explicitly the property of men. Justice was swift and severe, ranging from disfigurement to torture to death in horrific ways, and most often meted out with the approval or supervision of clerics. The power behind the power of all the royal families of Europe was the Pope. On November 27th, 1095, Pope Urban gave one of history's most famous speeches to the Council of Clermont in France, calling for a holy war against Islam to unite factious Europe. Dr. E.L. Skip Knox of Boise State University in Idaho summarized the Pope's speech. The noble race of Franks must come to the aid of their fellow Christians in the East. The infidel Turks are advancing into the heart of Eastern Christendom. Christians are being oppressed and attacked. Churches and holy places are being defiled. Jerusalem is groaning under the Saracen yoke. The Holy Sepulchre is in Muslim hands and has been turned into a mosque. The Franks must stop their internal wars and squabbles. Let them go instead against the infidel and fight a righteous war. God himself will lead them, for they will be doing his work. There will be absolution and remission of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy. Let none hesitate. They must march next summer. God wills it. Thus began a war between two different medieval cultures, 11th century Catholic and 11th century Muslim. Over the next few centuries, the Catholics, with their battle cry of Deus Vult, God wills it, were often victorious against the Muslims, whose only crime defined by the Pope was that they were living in the Holy Land of the Catholic Church. Medieval historian Raymond of Aguilles wrote the following eyewitness account of the attack and seizure of Jerusalem in 1099 by the triumphant Christian Crusaders. Quote, some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows so they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads, hand, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses. But these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where religious services were ordinarily chanted. What happened there? If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say, this much at least, that in the temple and portico of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. End of quote. In the 900 or so years since the early Crusades, both Christianity and Islam have undergone profound changes. The Protestant Reformation shook Christianity to its core, and the Renaissance in Europe wrought huge transformations in both Christianity and Judaism. Perhaps the most critical change came about in the 18th century when Jefferson, Madison, Franklin, and others synthesized the highest ideals of Greek, Roman, and Iroquois thought and culture to create the United States of America. In doing that, they ignited the flame of liberty, bringing into the world an archetype that to this day inspires hope worldwide. As America grew and our ideas of Republican democracy spread around the world, further transformations of the world took place. Another turning point was when modern science challenged the medieval worldview of the church in the Scopes monkey trial of 1925. Although Clarence Darrow lost that case, its widespread publicity began a dramatic and lasting process of change across the world. The American dream is a powerful and pervasive force in the world, even if the sometimes imperialistic behavior of our transnational corporations is often at odds with our own ideals. That dream has wafted over the entire world and is still so powerful that people are willing to die for it. In China, the Tiananmen Square protesters marched to their doom in 1989, carrying a 37-foot-tall papier-mâché replica of the Statue of Liberty, which they had renamed the Goddess of Democracy. Of course, there are still pockets of medieval perspective in the Christian world. The post-disaster comments of Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who said they had just witnessed the wrath of their God, who had lifted the veil and allowed the terrorists to act because of their God's anger over homosexuals, liberals, and the ACLU, reveals that such a worldview is still alive and well in a small fringe of Christianity. Some Christians are still today willing to commit terrorist acts of murder or mass murder. Timothy McVeigh and those who murdered numerous abortion providers all claim their acts are grounded in Christianity and biblical teachings. And just as 21st century Christianity still has its own pockets of medieval worldview, so does 21st century Islam. And then it gets into, how these reformations happen and, what we hope to see in among those right-wing crazies in Islam. The book is From the Ashes, A Spiritual Response to the Attack on America. Our one-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So people wonder, why militias all of a sudden? How is it that all kinds of Americans are showing up with assault weapons in the Capitol building trying to assassinate the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives and stop the counting of the presidential votes, the Electoral College votes? Where did this come from? The last time we saw an armed uprising against the federal government in the United States was 1861. It was the Confederacy. Is this a Confederacy rising again? Well, yeah, there is a huge white supremacist element to it. In fact, I'd say it's one of the primary animating impulses. But what really got these things going, these militias going, was the Heller decision written by the opinion written by Antonin Scalia and published on June 26, 2008. And it has crazy language in it, basically begging for militias. I share it with you in a special video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Okay, at the suggestion of an earlier caller who wanted to tell me how wonderful the Texas legislation was, I printed the bill out, HB 3979. I have it right here in my hands. It's 4 pages long, printed out, maybe 5. Yeah, no, it goes 4 pages long. And it's even worse than I thought. This is amazing. If you are a teacher or an administrator or an employee of basically any kind, or other employee in any state agency, school district, campus, open enrollment, charter school, or school administration, who shall make part of a course the following concept. Okay, so I'm going to teach you about why the Confederacy thought that slavery was a good thing. Right? John C. Calhoun, the senator from South Carolina, who invented the filibuster to block legislation about race in the 1830s, the former vice president, in fact, John C. Calhoun, who became a senator just to block the abolition of slavery. He made a speech on the floor of the Senate in which he referred to slavery as a positive good. That was his phrase. because you know, John C. Calhoun said, and presumably believed, that white people were the master race and that black people were not even completely human, and therefore slavery was not only appropriate, but, you know, like the right thing to do. So let's say that I'm your teacher in Texas, and I want to tell you about John C. Calhoun and how he led the South right straight to secession. And I try to explain to you that that's how John C. Calhoun saw the world. Under this new Texas law, I can go to jail for doing that or lose my job. No teacher shall make part of a course the following concept. Number one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. You may not discuss that. You may not discuss the fact that for large parts of American history, that wasn't just the belief of a lot of white people. That was the friggin' law. You may not discuss that. You may not discuss in any class that an individual, by virtue of his race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. You may not talk about unconscious racism or unconscious bias. You may not discuss that if you live in Texas under this law and you're a teacher. You may not bring that up in your classroom. You may not discuss or make part of your course the concept that, number 3, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his race or sex. You may not discuss the fact that that was actually the law in America. That was the law in Texas until after Reconstruction. You may not discuss that under this new Texas law. As a teacher, you may not do it. As an administrator, you may not allow it to happen in your school. As an employee in the school district, you have to make sure that this doesn't happen. You may not discuss the idea that was at the core of this country, and certainly the core of Texas, for a long, long time, and I would argue even to this moment, that an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. It's wrong, but you may not talk about it being wrong, because you may not talk about the concept at all. I'm up to number 4. There's a total of 8 of these things. These are things you may not discuss in a classroom in Texas. You may not discuss, well, that was number 5, race or sex. You may not discuss that an individual, by virtue of his race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. You may not discuss reparations. You may not discuss the fact that an individual may feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress on account of his race or sex. You may not discuss how racism has affected black people in America if you are a teacher in Texas. You may not include that as part of your curriculum. You may not. Lose your job, lose your income, go to jail, whatever it is, you may not do it. And of course, you may not discuss, this is the one the billionaires like, that meritocracy or traits such as a hard work ethic are racist or sexist or were created by members of a particular race to oppress members of another race. And I would argue that, yeah, I think that we could fairly clearly point out that meritocracy has been an idea that's been promoted for years and years in the United States as both a good thing, which you can argue it should be. You know, the people who do a good job, you know, end up with good rewards and good jobs and those kind of. But you may not discuss the fact that that's been an excuse for saying that, well, you know, I guess those black people that we just give them crappy schools and keep them living in poor neighborhoods just aren't smart enough to perform. You know, you may not discuss that that's the ideology that Republicans have been selling for years and years. You may not discuss that. It's really mind-boggling. I mean, you know, thanks to Steve, I think it was, the caller who called up and said, hey, how about this? And I said, I haven't read the law. Well, I read the law. I did it during the break. I read every word of it. Shelby in Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, Shelby, what's on your mind today?
Several things, Tom. To go back to the farming issue, we are just returning back from Route 61, which is the delta of Mississippi, to see family property, and it pretty much looks the same as it was 50, 75 years ago with my 90-year-old that I took back. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we now have these corporate farms who've taken over large blocks of acreage in the delta, where you did have at one time black farmers. Mm-hmm. And this industrial bioengineered plant laser guided drone dusting farming that you spoke about with the pesticide that they're using is an intersection, I think, about kind of a war that's been waged on and the dispossession of 98% of the black agricultural landowners in America, where we rode Route 61 about 2 weeks ago. We got to see that. Imposing plantations and ramshacked shotgun houses are still populating from Memphis to Vicksburg. Fields stretching where you used to have much of the scenery with cotton, white cotton bales, now is green with soybeans. So you have to have quite a bit of fertilizer. And the intersection of that with our health, as you were sharing, that we do have, and I do believe that COVID is, in fact, an ideology pandemic where we had gone in the van, and therefore we did not stay in hotels because of the fact that we had packed our foods, and we kind of would drive from place to place to be able to get to the careful. And we had on the mask. And we were amazed at just the kind of scorn when we would stop to get the gas, where people were scornful. We could feel the scorn of, you have the mask on, right? So, and of course, this has to do with this individualism that is a part of our culture, right? The kind of rugged individualism, the exceptionalism. Yeah, I think that's a part of it as well. But I also want to intersect the situation where we're now in Charleston back to celebrate with our family who are members, as we are, longtime affiliation with the Emmanuel AME Church, the historic church where we had 9 souls that were killed, with a young man now who was in court in Richmond this morning wanting to have his conviction overruled. This also has to do with the states' rights issue that the federal government came in and created the takeover of this case, if you remember, Tom. The state did file capital offense on him, but then the feds came in and took over the case, and he was, in fact, convicted of capital murder with death penalty. And I don't know any other person in the terms of, in America, a black man that would have gone into a white church and yet still now claiming that he said that he had no regret in his writings with the sentencing.
Yeah, Dylan Roof,
Yeah. And so that is how I think we have, as you stated earlier in your monologue, that we have a white culture, supremacy culture, where these are not all white people. This is, I really am not talking about race. I'm talking about the context of the culture.
Shelby, I get it. I agree with you. And I'm sorry we're out of time. But thank you so much. We'll be, hopefully we can talk a little bit longer next time. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Peggy in Bend, Oregon. Hey, Peggy. How's life there?
Hey,
what's
Tom.
up?
Hi, yeah. I had a cousin named George Floyd.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously.
Okay.
I'm white. He was white.
Yeah.
We're talking about the late 1930s on the eastern shore of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a young child. He was an adult, and I was so happy to see him because he always brought me a toy or a candy bar or something when he came to visit. But anyway, we left the Eastern Shore when World War II broke out, moved to Baltimore, and lost touch with cousin George Floyd. But then we got a phone call that he was in Johns Hopkins Hospital dying of cirrhosis of the liver. And we went to see him, and sure enough, he was dying of cirrhosis of the liver. He was all yellow and everything. But more than that, he was dying of shame because the gossip had traveled around the Eastern Shore that he was a secret drinker, and that's what gave him the cirrhosis of the liver.
Mm-hmm.
And poor George, if he had a glass of eggnog at Christmas, that was something. I mean, he never touched.
So what caused his cirrhosis?
Well, that's what I'm getting to. His job was as a field supervisor for Bird's Eye frozen vegetables, and he was out in the fields of the Eastern Shore of Virginia.
So you think it was pesticide exposure?
Subject to pesticide exposure for the whole time, and but nobody knew that at the time. This was way before Roundup. God knows what they were using, but it's probably just as lethal as Roundup.
Yeah, there were some
but anyway,
nasty ones.
He died, and not from having Chauvin's knee on his neck, but from having Big Ag's knee on his liver.
Yep.
So, but anyway, Trump took away the regulations on more than 50 lethal substances, pesticides, herbicides, and so forth. Well, you know that, of course.
Yeah, rolled back the dicamba rules, and we've got a lot more poison on our food right now because of Donald Trump.
And I don't think Vilsack is doing very much to alleviate that situation, is he?
I don't know. I haven't been keeping track of it. I know the objection to making Tom Vilsack the Ag Secretary was that he's always basically been in the pocket of Big Ag, of Monsanto.
That's right.
But
right where he is.
Yeah. And whether that's
anyway,
continuing, I can't tell you, Peggy.
But anyway, that's where it is right now, and I think of cousin George Floyd very often, and what befell him. Hey, Tom, I got a riddle for you.
Okay, quick.
Oh, quick. It's what do you call dinner and a movie with the Lone Ranger?
I don't know what.
Mask mandate.
Mask mandate. Good one, Peggy. Good one. Peggy, thanks a lot. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Bend, Oregon. That was a good one. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Back with your calls right after this. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Carmen in Bitterroot Valley, Montana. Hey, Carmen, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'm 72 now, but when I was young, like 19, 20, and 21, in the Mekong Delta, I got sprayed regularly with Roundup, the Roundup program. Now, as I...
You sure that wasn't Agent Orange? Or is Agent Orange?
Well, yeah.
the same thing.
Yeah, it was Agent Orange, but if you ever walk through any air base, and I have, I'm away to get helicopters to where I was going, you'd see the gallon drums, 55-gallon drums, and they say Roundup on every one of them.
Ah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So
are you
the
suffering
Roundup
lasting
program.
consequences from that, Carmen?
Oh, man. I'm lucky to be alive, bro. I mean, I think I'm putting it all now on Kymone, turmeric, and the K2 artery health that I'm, down in every day. And mostly what it does is I think by the time, I had a while where it ran around my body, like between my toes and stuff, like a lot of fibrinogen, just everything, kind of amber-looking stuff. Then it went across my chest for a while as I was in my 30s, and then it kind of disappeared and went into my chest, I think. And that's when by the time I was 43, I started having problems where I couldn't run anymore. And
Carmen, have you ever, has anybody ever said that your medical conditions can be directly traced back to your pesticide exposure in the military?
Oh, yeah, I've got documentation. Everything I got is documented.
I'm glad, because that's pretty important stuff. Carmen, I got to move along, but thank you for sharing your story with us. I mean, it's a tough one. It's like so many people have been poisoned in this country, and frankly, I think that we're all being poisoned in our food supply. James in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. I calling as an old grandpa today. My family's just been devastated by celiac, and I'm an old veteran from the 60s too, and exposed and just problems. But originally, I wanted to talk about education again, and that Texas laws handcuffing the teachers down there. That's a direct result of Donald Trump's mandate, his speech of September 17th, 2020, just last September. If you listen to that speech, Google it up. It's bone chilling. It's just like I said before, good for Halloween. These Republicans down there are just following his direct orders, and in the future, whatever.
You shall not teach racism and the history of racism in America. You shall not teach the history of white supremacy in America. You shall not teach the history of the Confederacy in America. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre.
I've been trying to get everybody I know to call that speech up and listen to it, and it's important. And our teachers, our PTAs, our administrators need to be aware of the effects.
I just wrote it down.
Speech, this one speech.
I'll check into it when I get off the air, James.
What's most frightening about it is picturing the people that could sit and listen to that speech.
Yeah, I'm with you. Okay, I'll check it out. I just wrote it down. Thank you very much. Barry in Phoenix. Hey, Barry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to add to the Roundup conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've had a long journey with gut health myself since the early 2000s. And I just wanted to say that, the new scientific research is talking about our guts as really our second brain. They are our immune system.
Yeah, it doesn't just, our gut bacteria don't just appear to regulate our weight, they regulate our mood as well.
Exactly. Well, not only our mood, but I think everything, our whole immune system.
Our metabolism,
and
immune system.
And I would submit that, a lot of these autoimmune disorders now that have come up are coming from,
that makes a
the
lot of
Roundup.
sense.
I just, and I know that when I finally found the answer, that a lot of my autoimmune disorders started to disappear when I started eating organically and vegetarian and no Roundup and no grains.
Yeah,
So,
same here.
Anyway, I think there's a huge connection going on. And one further thing, I find it stunning that the pharmaceutical industry now, most of their new pharmaceutical lines are biologics and their embryos and things like that are working to turn off our immune system.
Right.
So rather than getting the stuff out of our food supply, let's just turn off the immune system.
Yeah, my personal theory on that too is that we have for decades we tried to kill off the bacteria in our guts, thinking that they were invaders. They used to, back in the 50s, they literally used to give antibiotics to people, for that. And we've also killed off some of the larger parasites, and I think that they have something to do with modulating the immune system too. That's a whole nother discussion. But I agree with you that glyphosate is a huge piece of this. Barry, thank you for the call. And thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you, huh? It's a time when we all need to be reaching out to each other and being kind to each other. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Club's creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.